Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. This is Throwback Thursday. One Thursday each month, we take a trip back in time to a previous podcast. With so many new visitors to the podcast, I thought it was a good time to get back to some of the good stuff we've had from the past.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Q Sciences. Don and I discovered that the supplements we were taking and giving to our children were not being absorbed properly. I was very excited when I found Q Sciences. I was impressed with the quality of the products and that they provide maximum absorption. They have a variety of products, including a Q Max product, which is a combination of 3 products, including vitamins, minerals, and a probiotic. They also have hemp oil, a vitamin B12 spray, a sleep spray, and kids products. I've really seen a difference in how these products are improving how I feel, improving my mental health, and I'm happy with the quality of these products and how they're helping our whole family. If you'd like to learn more,
simply go to qsciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. Or you can find a link on the front page of the focusedhealthyfamily.com website.
and stop throwing your money away on supplements that don't work and use a quality product like Q Sciences.
So join me now as we travel back in time. This podcast was recorded on March 27th, 2017. This is podcast number 6 called The Sponge Years. Now, last podcast we talked about raising the inner child. You know, the concept was the idea that we grow up as human beings physically, and we grow up educationally, all of that, but we don't always raise the inner child, the emotional child, the mental child, whatever you want to call it. So this podcast, what I want to talk about here is it's called the sponge years, and I think I'm not the only one to use that term. But let me read something from a site called Everyday Language that kind of tells a few things. First, and I quote, "They soak in information from the stimuli surrounding them. Between birth and 3 years of age, the human brain increases to 80% of its adult size." Now, going a little further into this, they talk about the different things that you can identify with atypical development of a child during that time frame. During that time frame of 0 to 3. Here are some of the things that go on during that age range. So it kind of gives you an idea of how the path should go. So from birth to 6 months, communication by smiling, crying, and babbling. 7 months to 1 year, babbling becomes differentiated. So what you see there is words trying to be formed versus just cooing or babbling, as they say. 1 year to about 1.5 years, they learn to say several words. From 1.5 to 2 years, words spurt begins. So they start growing with their vocabulary. They like a growth spurt, but this is a word spurt. 2 years to 3 years, talks and sentences, vocabulary grows. So they continue to grow. And then 3+ years, the vocabulary grows. So that comes again from Everyday Language website, which I will hopefully put on the website there for you as a source for this. So the infant brain, it starts to develop neurons and synapses along with neurotransmitters. And these neurons and synapses are what helped us to grow and develop. They're run by electrical and chemical pulses. Now, let me define for you, this is pretty much in layman's terms, what neurons are. Neurons are special cells of the body that are electrically that electrically communicate through the nerve system, taking in and sending messages out to the body and to the mind. Synapses, on the other hand, are the tiny spaces between that connects the neurons and the molecules called neurotransmitters, and that take message. The synapses take messages across from one neuron to another neuron. And I might throw in here what I don't think people realize, and I think I might have mentioned this before, but I'm not sure. The communication between these neurotransmitters and the neurons, they talk about it's chemical and electrical. 2% of that, roughly, is chemical. 98% of that is electrical. And I want to bring about this matter because the medical drugs or medicine that we take really only shoots mostly towards the chemical side of that equation. And so that's why I find the work I do with the tapping and with the alpha stem and all that works on the electrical side of it. And you have to work on that side. And that's why I think that the medications aren't always as effective when it comes to the brain and to anxiety and things like that. So something to keep in mind. And what's interesting too, children have more synapses at the age of 3 than an adult does, which means that they do lose some of those, probably luckily. Now, this is something that comes from the Urban Child Institute. And I'll have their address on the site. The earliest messages that the brain receives have an enormous impact. So what we take in our environment, as I always say, it kind of becomes the rule. But let me continue on with their message here. Early brain development is the foundation of human adaptability and resilience. But these qualities come at a price. So here's a very interesting part of this. So what they're saying is, we're that sponge. We're taking in really everything from the environment, from our parents, from the environment, from other people. So it comes at a price, because experiences have such a great potential to affect the brain development. Children are especially vulnerable to persistent negative influences during this period. Now, luckily, just as much as they can absorb the negative, here's the other side of it. And this is again from Urban Child Institute. On the other hand, these early years are a window of opportunity for parents, caregivers, and communities. Positive early experiences have a huge effect on a children's chances for achievement, success, and happiness. And this is something that I really try to emphasize when I'm talking to a client and working with them, is how much this sponge years plays into it. Now here's how I see them taking in this information. They take in from genetics, from environment, sound and speech and movement, emotions. I really believe kids from a very, even in utero, are taking in the emotions of the parents and feeling what's going on with the parents, whether it's good or bad. And finally, nutrition. So with more synapses up there, the child takes in much more than they need, which means they are sponges, to what is going on around them, both in the womb and what they pick up from outside sources. So, what I always tell clients when I'm working with them, to kind of get this picture, we almost take this stuff on like a coat. And we wear this coat when we're very small. And we grow up physically, but we're still wearing that little coat of maybe a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. And that coat gets too small for us. And so we it's very uncomfortable, and a lot of times it's like becoming the Hulk. It starts ripping, and we can't. It starts tearing us apart. So we have to get into that. So now they claim, in what I've read you so far, they claim that it goes to the age of 3. I think the sponge years go to about the age of probably about 20. And here's why. Here's what I kind of sense out of it. It's not so much that you still aren't taking things in. It just changes as it goes along. If we think about it in the manner of an actual sponge, over time a sponge will dry up. It won't be as effective, or it gets dirty. But I think what happens is from 0 to about 8, you still are very absorbent. Maybe a little bit dries up. And then as you get on into the teen years, there's still some absorbency, but it's much smaller and much more filtered. I think we get filters to it, so it's almost like putting a cover on that sponge somewhat. So we don't take in as much. We still do take in, but not as much. So I think we're constantly taking stuff in till we're into our late teens, and then disseminating it from then on and figuring out what to do with it. So it can go into a much later time. So like I said, when I work with people in helping them get through some of their issues, we normally delve back into the childhood and figure out where something might have been infiltrated or taken in that doesn't help them. So here's another part that I really try to emphasize. A lot of people have come to me and they say, well, I think I've worked through it. I was just a kid then. I didn't know any better. And that's very true. But here's the point, I think. A child, a young child especially, from 0 to about 8, triggers, traumas, stresses, all can be very different than what we define it as an adult. A trauma can be words that are said. They can be very traumatic to a child. They can be actions. And here's the thing that I really emphasize a lot too is, as a child and as that sponge years are happening, we see the parent as the authority. So it kind of becomes a situation of the parent is right and everything else is wrong. So we take it in that way. If it doesn't feel comfortable to us as a child, and I've seen this in abuse, physical as well as emotional, that if it doesn't feel right to the child, even though that's coming from the parent, everything they do is right. So if it doesn't feel right, then the blame gets turned and the child takes the blame on themselves. I must have done something wrong. That's why it doesn't feel good to me. That's why it doesn't look right to me. And so we take on this blame, and we, because the parent is the authority. So that has to be changed. And the reason I think a lot of that happens is that the child has no good definitions of right or wrong at that point other than what the parent gives them. They have nothing to contrast it against. They have no real experiences to show them differently. And so without those definitions, they have to decide with this very small amount of experience what to do with that stuff that's happening to them, or that environment, or that messages that are coming to them. And so they have to handle it. So the brain kind of takes over and says, I'm going to handle it by shutting you down. I'm going to handle it by you acting out. So it finds different ways to be able to, because the brain's job is to keep us safe and keep us comforted. And so in order to be safe, if it perceives this stuff that's coming at it as a threat, even though it's coming from the parent, then it's going to do stuff to protect them. And it holds on to that because it comes into a time when those things become the rule. Those things that they take in become the rule. And while this is all happening, their five senses are coming to play. So it gets tied into those senses too. So what I'm hoping that you come out with on this podcast are three things. First, the importance of the sponge years and beyond in a child's development. Because, as I said, they are taking everything in during at least the first part of those sponge years as verbatim. Those are the rules. And from then on, they can become the rules of their life. And I have seen clients that are in their 70s now, because I do, though I emphasize in kids and families, I work with individuals too. And I've worked with some patients that are clients that are in their 70s and still living by the rules they learned when they were 5 years old. So I can't emphasize enough of the importance of these sponge years and getting that environment in line. Second, is that when a child or someone has issues, many times it's helpful to understand what came about or what went on during these sponge years. And it could be a death in the family. It could be words spoken. It could be something maybe a preschool teacher or a teacher has done or said to them, or some kind of violence that's been portrayed on them or their family, a fire in the house, something like that. Third, as a parent, to understand how important it is to have a great environment. Learn to speak and act in appropriate ways, to help their development. And factors of nutrition play into that development. That goes all the way into the place of the womb when a woman's pregnant. Nutrition plays into that chemical communication. I believe it also plays some into the electrical. But you have to think about what you're putting in there and dig deep into what is good and bad about that. Not just the surfacey kind of nutritional stuff, but look at what's fit for you as a pregnant woman. What's the best stuff for you to help your system and the baby system. And then as we develop, after birth and they develop, is to keep in mind that all these things play a role. Environmental plays a role. Nutrition, genetics, all of that play a role. And it's important to look at each one of those pieces. Not beat yourself up, but do your best at each one of them. It's fun to travel back in time and listen to past events and podcasts. Maybe you have a story from the past about how you overcame OCD. Or maybe you want to tell what you're going through right now dealing with OCD. We want to hear about it. Simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com, and on the left-hand side you'll see a little area that says Stories from the OCD Side. Click there and tell us all about it. We'll be happy to listen and put you out there. And remember, my wife and I are here to help you with your OCD and your anxiety. Simply go to familyocd.com or focusedhealthyfamily.com, and there you can connect with us and get a free consult to find out if we can help you. And thank you for visiting us today on the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, and we'll look forward to your next visit with us. So thanks for coming. Take care.